Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Corey Webb, and I'm the Marketing Director here at TurnZero, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar titled Move Beyond ICP, Focus on Ideal Customer Behaviors to Accelerate User Adoption and Success. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you that we are recording today's session, and we will be sending out a link to the recording 24 hours after this webinar. We do ask that you go ahead and submit your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of this webinar. Now I'm pleased to introduce to you our speaker today, Jason Whitehead. Jason is the co-founder of the Success Chain, which is an agency that provides customer success consulting, professional development, training, and CS coaching workshops. Jason is also the co-host of a popular podcast called The Jason's Take On, which I would recommend checking out. And he has 25 years of experience leading tech implementations and adoption programs, and which makes him a perfect person for us to be talking to today about customer behaviors. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Jason.
Great, thanks so much, Corey. And hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining today. Really excited to be talking with you about this topic, which is near and dear to my heart. I'm going to share some ideas that I hope are new and interesting to you, or give you some ideas about some other things and practical things that you can do with your team to help adjust how you engage with customers and drive adoption and success. If you find this useful, please let us know, and would love to have you connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know what you find useful and areas where you think, hey, this idea doesn't work for us, or this is going to be great, or this is going to be a challenge for us. Feedback is a gift, and I would love the opportunity to learn from you and your experiences. So with that said, let's just jump right in here and get started as we go. What are we talking about? What is ideal customer behavior, and what does that look like? And I just love this image. When I came across this, it made me smile so much, because I think this really captures the essence, and it's a simple thing that we can all relate to, and then we'll apply it to CS a little bit down the road. But just looking at this image of a coffee shop and saying, you know, what are the behaviors we want from our customers? And just right off here, if you just say coffee plate, coffee, 5 pounds, you know, or Desi chai, please. Oh, we'll give you a little knockdown for that. Or hello, Desi chai, please. And it's going to give you a nice incentive right there. But what I love about this is the coffee shop made it easy for people to understand what are the behaviors that they want and what are the benefits to them when they exhibit them. So how often do we do things like this with our customer? And how is this different from what we might be doing today? You know, many of us have great tools like TurnZero or others that help us identify these are some key onboarding tasks and activities that need to happen, but we really don't go down to the behavioral level. So let's just take a second to look at this. So in this context, you might have a task that says get coffee for the team, and we can, you know, red light, you know, is it done? Is it not done? Is it late? Is it behind the task? But that's about as far as it goes many times. And then we think, well, there's a process behind this, and we order, you know, go up to the counter, we place our order, we pay, we collect our coffee, and then we drink it. And the process is pretty straightforward. Though the process might be slightly different at each different coffee house you go to. The counter might be at one end and you may pay somewhere else and you're not quite sure what to do, but you know the basics and you figure it out. But then really getting to that next level of behavior and saying, hello, please, and thank you. These are behaviors that are different from a process and different from the task, but absolutely crucial to creating a successful experience and environment. Completing the order on time and getting things right for each person, those are behaviors as well too. So why don't you just share this simple example to get you thinking about what is customer behavior and how can we as a vendor influence it? So just to break this down a little bit more, quite simply, you know, the task and a lot of the task management that we may be doing today, what needs to get done? And the process, how are we going to go about doing it? And then really thinking that next level of granularity, the behavior. What are the specific actions a person's going to take that influence the experience and their perceptions and outcomes while performing the task to complete the process to complete each task? You know, something that you might think about as well too, as you look at this simple example, what was the experience, what was going on in that coffee shop that they decided they needed to create this policy and they needed to try and influence behavior? What were the experiences that they were having, and what was the environment like that they said, hey, we need to do something different. We need to create a more positive experience for our customers and for our staff. What do you think was going through their head? And then I often wonder as well too, as you see with their pricing, did they decide to discount to influence proper behavior and positive behavior? Or did they decide to increase prices and penalize those who were negative and causing distractions for others? So there's a lot of things going on in this very simple example, and I suspect that there are in your organization as well too. Okay. So what is the problem for CS, and why is this a relevant example? I think right off, we probably all have defined processes and tasks, maybe for onboarding or for renewals or for other key areas of what we need to do or when new functionality gets delivered. But what are people actually doing? Are they following that process? Are they doing it well? Are they responsive? Are they timely? Are they working with you collaboratively as a customer to create mutual success? And the reality is, and when we talk with a lot of customers and CS folks, many times customers are really not taking the actions they need to create the value from the technology. And then they're getting frustrated. And then they're saying, it's not working for us. And then they're saying, why should we renew, or we're going to cut back? And when we look at all of this, just having identified tasks and assigning those isn't getting the job done. And so we need to think of some new approaches and new ways to drive behavior amongst our customers and internally, and new ways to drive success. So that's why we're talking about this, and I hope you'll find it relevant for you. So in the next few minutes, we're going to talk about the why, the what, the how, and some key takeaways. And then we have plenty of time for questions as well, too. But before we jump in, just a little bit about me so you understand that I have a little background in this area that's relevant. As Corey said, I am the co-founder of Success Chain and previously Tritons. Have done a lot of work leading, helping global leaders of customer success build their programs, build their teams, develop their processes. And half of our business is also on consulting on adoption and user adoption and behavior change, working with buyers of software. In addition, I've done some study that has a lot of psychology involved in there. I have a degree in organization development and human resources that was very participative in looking at people and behaviors, as well as a degree in information system, like taking a socio-technical approach. So I've been exposed to a lot of psychology reading and practices and studies, and I've incorporated them into the work that I've done. I'm not a PhD psychologist, but I have been in this space, so hopefully I can share some of my learnings and experiences with you. All right, just a little bit about me. So let's jump into the why. I want to share with you a discussion of two customers and see if this resonates with you. You have two customers that maybe they sign up on the same day, and similar size, similar industry. They're all in your ICP, and we're very excited about them. We have great hopes they're going to be wonderful. One of your customers will be on top of their game. They'll follow all the tasks. They'll have work done on time. They'll be thorough. They'll be efficient. And they're getting great results right off the bat and all the way through. They're sort of the ideal customer, and that you smile when you get their emails and you look forward to the calls with them. And then there's the other one. And I think we've all had this one that is late getting materials to you. They're frustrated. They're not following through on their tasks. They're not honoring their commitments. They're not doing any of the things they need to do to drive success. You can see the train wreck coming of how much time it's going to be to help move them along, and how they probably are going to be difficult all the way, and they won't really cut through and deliver the way they want. And at the end, they're probably going to turn a hell of a lot sooner than the other one. So let me know if you can picture these two customers, and if you've ever had that situation there. And then you think, well, what's different? They both fit our ICP. They're both ideal customer profiles. So why is it that some succeed while others fail? And really, when you look at it, the technology is the same. The software, the products that you are selling to your customers, implementing, they're the same regardless of who's buying them. The functionality is the same. It's the people who are different. It's the people in your buyer's organization, the choices they make, the decisions they make, how they are organized, and the behaviors they demonstrate that make all the difference between success and failure. The technology is a technology. So when you think about that, why this is so important is really driving success requires you to look more at the people and not the tech, or not just the tech. Obviously, you need to get that as well, too. So with that as a backdrop, really, what is ideal customer behavior? And as we said, this is really those set of desired actions and behaviors that your customers should take at each stage of your journey to drive mutual success. Obviously, what's going to make them successful, but you're in a partnership with your customers. They need to make sure that you as the vendor are successful as well, too. And you need to be able to work collaboratively. And I think many organizations, we ask them, well, what are the ideal actions you'd want your customers to take? They don't always know, and they haven't really thought about it. And by thinking about this and mapping it out, you're going to be more effective at getting those behaviors from your customer. So let's just take a quick second here and talk about a shift. Many times people talk about their ICP, and it's used a variety of different ways, but many times, and historically in my experience, it's been the ideal customer profile is really those sales target demographics. Who are the companies that we think will have a problem we can solve that will have sufficient budget and need that they would be interested in hearing from us and working with us, that will buy our software, product, and service and be successful. And a lot of times, by understanding our ideal customer profile and personas and all that great stuff, sales and marketing can do some great work to help target them and provide them the information they need to buy that initial sale. But then when we look at who's actually going to renew and who's going to buy more, which is really the domain of customer success, that really comes down to the choices they make with that product and software, the choices they make about implementing and driving adoption in their organization, and the choices they make to achieve and perceive value, and how they will work with you as a customer success team. And I think when you understand the ideal behaviors of your customer and what you should be asking them to do, you can have better success as a customer success team to get them to use the system in a way that generates value for them so they will buy more. And that's really why we're looking at this. So let's talk about the what. Let me give you a quick practical example related to SaaS. I was recently talking with the head of customer success at an organization, and she was telling me that their product is, like many of yours, I'm sure, a little bit complex to get set up initially. It takes a few months of getting data, getting things. They actually have the hardware component as well too, and there's the software and integrations and testing, all that great stuff that it does require a lot of participation by the customer. They need to assign their IT resources and ideally the right IT resources to go make this happen. And she said many of their customers, if they do all the steps and process, they could be up and running anywhere between 30 and 90 days. And many of their customers are. Yet some of their customers take much longer. Some are even 6 months or longer before they get set up. And they're on an annual contract, so renewals are quickly coming up, and they haven't really done the work they need to do to be successful. They're not getting the value. They're not seeing the value. So they struggle here. And what was interesting, what I really thought was fascinating, is she said that, they're obviously revenue growth. The CEO basically said to the sales team that they can go and discount any customer up to 30% without even getting approval. That's automatically okay. And if they need additional discounts or approval for the right situation, they would go and do this. And I just illustrated for them and said, right now you're not incentivizing the right behavior. You are rewarding a customer up front before they've taken any actions that may or may not make them successful. Instead, you can still offer those financial incentives and financial discounts, but structure in a way to drive the behavior you want. And a very simple thing you can do in a situation like that is don't offer the discount up front, but instead offer the discount as soon as they go live and complete their onboarding steps, either a discount off of a future payment or a refund or however you want to structure it. But basically, when the customer demonstrates their commitment to mutual success and when they take the actions that they need to create value for themselves and ultimately for you, that's when you exchange this value. So think about how many of your customers would be incentivized to perform differently if there was a different structure to your deal right from the very beginning. And how can you make that work? Okay. So when we look at this, just to sum it up here, we want to really shift from just a task focus to behavior focus. What are they doing? What are they not doing? And to make that happen, we need to map out what are those desired behaviors that our customers need to be taking that will create value. And then we need to figure out, well, how do we engage differently? How do we adjust what we do to get them to drive that desired behavior? And then finally, rewarding customers based on their actual demonstrated behavior, not their intentions. And one of my favorite quotes that, and I'm not sure where it came from, is, we judge ourselves by our intentions, we judge others by their actions. And this is really a situation with your customers that you need to look at what are their actions and adjust accordingly. So again, there's sort of two components here when we talk about these. What are those actions, those behaviors that you want? And then how is it you will motivate your customers and the individuals within your customer's organization to take those desired actions? So there's really three key levels here that we want to look at. I think the first one that we want to talk about is what are the product usage behaviors? And that's really looking at what are the actions and activities that users are taking on a day-to-day basis within your platform, your software, your tool. Are they putting information in the right way? Are they putting it in accurately? Are they updating records as appropriately? Or are they kind of letting things slide a little bit and using a little bit of functionality, but not using it well? Are they using it in a way that enables everyone else in their organization to be successful with the same tool? Or are they using it in a way that's great for them as an individual, but really hurts the overall value to the customer organization? And then there's the other piece, which is the single biggest driver of adoption in the customer's organization are the immediate supervisors of the end users. And their actions come from higher up. So what are those leadership behaviors that are happening in your customer's organization that will drive change, will drive adoption, and get people in their organization to use your platform or software as intended and as designed? Have you incentivized those leadership behaviors? Have you incentivized your customers to do the right thing in their own organization to drive change and adoption and success? And many times the answer is no. And then finally, the third piece is, what are the behaviors that your customers take when engaging with you as a vendor? Are they showing up to QBRs? Are they being responsive in fulfilling their commitments for setup and action items? Are they getting you the information that you need to make them successful? Are they engaging with you in a way that is giving you positive reviews on G2 or other things, or giving you case studies or referrals, all things that you need to be successful as a business? And if they're not doing those things, what can you change to influence those behaviors? So those are three areas to look at. What's going on in the product, what's the leadership doing in their organization, and then how is your customer engaging with you as a vendor? And you can start to look at those items and map behaviors against each one of those areas. And you can do that against the customer journey map as well too, to see what should be happening in each of these steps. And then I'll tell you a second, talk about motivation and incentives here. And really, there's a couple of levels you need to look at for your incentives. And one, what are those company level incentives, sort of those business incentives that are relevant to your customers and that will make their business more successful? And these typically tend to be the financial drivers, such as, can we get the discounts that we want on this service? Is it priced right? Can we get the service level agreements that we need? Can we get the quality that we need? Are they reducing risk for us in our organization? How are we as a company going to benefit? And in my experience, these tend to be more rationally based incentives that really drive the executives to make the buying and renewing decision. But that's only half the story. The other side is that what are those personal incentives to get the individual people in that organization to deliver the behaviors you want? And these are more the personal incentives. And these don't have to be financial. They can be anything else. So this is basically what needs to happen to get end users to use the application correctly. What needs to happen to get leadership to take the actions they need to take to drive adoption? What needs to happen to incentivize folks to take the steps necessary to engage with you so that everyone's successful? And you can get very creative here. I've spoken with a few CS teams where they actually will offer free training and free certifications to system administrators if they complete certain activities on time. And while that's great for the company, that helps those individuals for their resume, for their LinkedIn profile, for their future career prospects. Some customer leaders, they like to present at conferences and help raise their PR. They like to do webinars and get some professional reputation for themselves out there, or raise their own stature in their own organization. There may be things that you can do to incentivize that. So the personal incentives can be financial or non-financial. And I think another thing to keep in mind is that you as the vendor don't necessarily need to be the one delivering all the personal incentives. So for incentivizing end user adoption, your customers should be coming up with those incentives for their own people. You may need to guide them on how to do that. You may need to give them recommendations on some financial and non-financial incentives they can do for that, but it doesn't necessarily have to come directly from your organization. Your job is to make sure that those incentives are aligned with the behaviors that you want, even if those incentives come from your customer. Okay, so that's just a little bit there as well too, and usually you can map these out. This is really things that people have been doing for years though. Sales folks have commission plans, people have performance management plans, have bonus plans, have all kinds of things. The difference here is that you're taking, instead of what's typically done internally, you as a vendor are saying, how can I do this externally as well too to influence customer behavior and performance? So just real quick as it relates to that, to show you this is grounded in historical psychology and social science. There is a Victor Vroom, a psychologist at Yale back in the 60s, basically came through and said, if you have incentives that correlate to the performance that you want, and that people believe that that performance will get a desirable reward, and that reward is important to them, they're going to do what you want them to do. It's pretty straightforward. I think we all know this, but just to let you know, there is some grounding in psychology around that. Also, I want to just quickly call out a couple of books that I found very helpful and would encourage you to read as well. There's James Clear has a great website and an email as well. It's called Atomic Habits, and then The Habit Mechanic. Both of these books look at how you change habits for yourself or for others. Some of it is personal habits, some is work habits, but what I would encourage you to do is as you read books like this, to think through how can you apply this to CS and how can you apply this to working with your customers. There's a lot of great techniques covered in both of these books that might give you some inspiration, so please check them out. Okay, so moving on to the how. Tried to break this into 5 steps that are pretty easy, and we'll talk about these. 1, identify the desired customer behaviors, then look at how you're going to reward those, and then look at how you need to make changes in your organization to drive changes in behavior in your customer's organization. Pilot these new approaches and take small steps. This doesn't have to be a huge initiative, but you can start small and build on success as you go, and then learn and iterate and increase all the way through. So this doesn't have to be a radical adjustment to what you're doing, but it can be another tool, another layer that you put into some of the activities you already do to try and move forward. So let's talk through what are some more granular examples of specific behaviors that you might want to request from your customers. And these are things that, as I've spoken to many CS teams over the years, that said they say these are challenges. I can't get my customer to get on to take my call. I can't get them to show up to meetings. I can't get them to respond to email. The basic non-responsiveness is just a huge one that comes up all the time. I'll get them to they won't do work on time. They'll be months late. Go through and think through. There's probably a lot of things that go here, and I think there are a couple of ways that you can approach this with your customers here. One is really looking through what are those behaviors we're trying to behave. And what I like to do is start with the most successful customers out there. What are the folks that get the most value? What is it that they're doing that I wish everyone else would do? What are the tasks that they're doing? What's the attitude that they're having? What's the responsiveness that they're having? And how do we get everyone else to understand this is what will make them successful and replicate it? And then the other side, you can also look through what are those challenges and behaviors that waste time or make things difficult or throw things off the rails, and also try to avoid those, but start with the positive. So you'll get a bigger bang for your buck there. So first step here, as we said, is what's going to make you successful, make your customer successful, and really document that so that you can ask for that. It will change over time, so you need to pay attention to that and continue to update those every so often. And then really figure out who in your customer's organization will be driving the change for them, will be getting them to look at those behaviors. And then also looking through it, and as we like to say, talk about ability times motivation, and really can they and will they take the behaviors that you want them to. In some situations, especially at the end user level, there may be barriers outside of their control that prevent them from using the tool and demonstrating behavior you want, even if they want to. And in those cases, you need a way to identify what those barriers are and escalate them up to their customers so they can resolve them. But step 1 is to figure out what does good look like and what are the behaviors that we want. And step 2 is coming up with those incentive plans, as we talked about. And this is looking at, again, those company and the individual's incentives. And what I highly, highly recommend is don't give away value for nothing. Instead, exchange value for value creating behavior. And that's coming back to that example I gave you earlier of don't just give away a 30% discount right up front. Instead, when you demonstrate the behaviors that you're committed to making everyone successful, then we'll give you the value as a reward for that. So I think that's important to do in there. And then also put in those individual incentives and help your customer create those internal incentives that they need. One other thing to think about here is when I talk with senior executives and end users in organizations that are trying to implement technology, many times they struggle to get the resources and commitment and support that they need from others in their organization and their executives in order to do what they need to do to be successful. And by identifying what can make them successful, but also having the incentives, like we said, exchanging value for value creating behaviors, that can give them some internal air coverage and leverage to help them go through and actually get the support that they need to advocate for the resources they need to be successful. So many times you are actually doing your customer a favor by structuring it in a way that allows them to advocate internally for the resources they need. Okay. One of the first questions I like to ask everyone is, how do you change someone else's behavior? How do you get someone else to do something different? And the short answer is, well, you don't. You can change your own behavior, or you can change the environment and hope that will put on the changes that you want down there. So when you think about this, I want you to think through what are the changes that need to be made that either the way you engage with a customer, the way you present yourself, the way you can behave towards them, or what are those policy changes, process changes, resources changes that you can do differently to enable your customer to take the changes and behavior that you want. So sort of the Michael Jackson approach. Let's start with the man in the mirror, if you will, and go through that. So when you're thinking about the behavior you want, you always have to come back to what am I going to do differently to get a different result? Similarly, and this is a step that people so often overlook, is make sure you ask for the behavior that you want. I am constantly amazed how many times when we go and talk with end users who aren't using the application, and we say, hey, you've been trained on the system and you knew what to do. Why aren't you guys doing it? And they say, no one ever asked us to. No one ever told us to. That happens all the time. So it's a very basic step, but make sure you don't forget to ask for the behavior you want, ask consistently, and reinforce it. And then step 4, as we talked about, let's try to run some small pilots with a subset of customers. Ideally, new customers is a great way to go. And really build out what is the minimum viable behavior program that we want, and start to test what works and what doesn't. If we change this policy, do we get the behavior that we want? If we engage with someone differently, do we get the results that we want? And then go through and measure the results and see what's worked, what hasn't, and then iterate. And again, this is just a small example of, you don't have to do everything big. And let me give you one example as well, too, to make it a little more specific. Many years ago, I was working with a company and I was an internal CRM manager, and we were launching a e-service portal, which back in those days, it was very new and different. Like, oh, of course we have an online service request portal. Today, it's expected you will, but back then it was very new. And we tried to map out what are the changes that we need our staff to take to get our customers to actually use that. And we went through a variety of things, from sending a team out to do a change and meet with each customer to demonstrate the new tool and explain the new process and request that they do it. And then when new customers would come in, we would train them up as part of their training. Here's the support process. But what also happened that was neat is we trained the internal support staff that the first time a customer contacts you the old way, picks up the phone or doesn't go through the new service process, here's how you're to respond. You're to take the answer, start the question, and request that next time they go via the portal. The next time, if they do it again, you let them know that you've opened a ticket, but you can't, or you'll start to research, but you can't move or respond until they open the ticket. And then from that point forward, it was every time that they must start with a ticket and provide the information that we need before you're allowed to make any changes whatsoever. There were a few customer grumblings, but a few interesting things happened. One, customers quickly took to the new process, the new flow. And two, that after they got through some initial complaint, we saw a huge decrease in time to serve customers. It was working. It was faster response time, closer to first call resolution because we were getting the information up front. We needed a variety of different things. But by taking the steps to think through how we were going to change their behavior and engage with them, both for existing customers and then new customers as well too, it smoothed things along very differently. And the key there was also empowering our internal staff to engage differently with the customers. So just a quick example that hopefully will trigger some ideas with your team of what you can do. Okay, and then step 5, again, deploy across all your customers. So look through, how do you optimize your engagement for new customers? How do you let them know right up front, hey, this is how we work, and these are the behaviors that are going to get you there. Many times during onboarding calls, folks go very quickly into the functionality and what's been sold and the schedule, but they don't really talk through both the process, like we saw in that coffee example, what are the steps that need to go through throughout execution, as well as the behaviors that will make them successful. And the more that you can spend time identifying those behaviors, making them explicit for your customer, the more likely you are to get those behaviors that you want. And then there's also building out the tools and materials to inform them. You can do some very simple things here to encourage the specific behavior. You can bake it into your automated programs. You can go through and show them, don't do this, but do this instead, and give them a very clear visual for what needs to happen that will make them successful. And you can do this as well by explaining to them that, hey, let's talk a little bit about the behaviors that all of our successful customers have found work for them so that you can be more successful yourself. And position this in a way that makes it feel like you are providing them guidance and direction to make their job easier. So do all that, monitor and adjust as you go through, look at your incentives, what's working, what's not, and then continually update your program just like you would anything else. Your needs will change, your incentives will change, your customers will change. It's not a set and forget situation. So a few key takeaways, and then we'll open this up to some questions. Your product enables behavior, but it's those behaviors that really drive success, okay? The product itself has the capability and potential to deliver success, but it's what your customers actually do with it that will make the difference. guide them through it. There's 3 types of ideal customer behavior. There's the product usage that we talked about, the change leadership, and vendor engagement. So make sure that you're thinking about all of those different behaviors at those different levels and how you can map out what's going to make customers successful and then request that behavior. And then coming back and saying, number 3, internal changes are going to be required of you and your team for how you engage to drive the desired customer behavior. So take a look, figure out what it is you need to change there. Again, for incentives and motivation, a couple of key things here. Provide both those company and the personal incentives. See where they need to go. You can't do just one or the other. If you can have a great company incentive and great things there, but if the individuals don't feel any benefit or only feel pain to get that, it's probably not going to go very far. Structure your incentives the right way and prioritize incentives for maximum results. And I think it's important to recognize as well too, there tends to be an urge to over-incentivize everything when you start to map these out. And people sometimes get into the one-to-one mapping of this behavior will get me there, so I must have an incentive for that. You don't need to have an incentive for absolutely everything. Prioritize your incentives around the key things and get people focused on, if I do these 1 or 2 tasks, and it can be a couple of tasks, we will get this great reward that is desirable, but you don't have to overthink it too much. So a couple things to think about as you're doing this, because some people are like, oh, I'd be uncomfortable with that. And I hear this all the time from CSMs, like, oh, I'm not comfortable asking my customer to do this or telling them they're doing the wrong things. But keep in mind, your customers want to be successful. It's good for them. It's good for their careers. It's good for their self-esteem. It's good for their day. It's good for their reputation. But they need to be asked or told how they can get there. And they don't always know. They are very, very busy people. And I think most of us can raise our hand and say, oh, I don't have a lot of free time in my day. What could I do differently? Do the thinking for them. Go through and say, these are the things that our most successful folks do, and here's why they are relevant for you, and here's how easy it is. Also, in that, piecemeal it. Don't overwhelm them with too much too soon. Give them the big picture and let them know that you'll be sharing ideas every step of the way to make it easier for them, but don't overwhelm them. And quite simply, just make it easy for them to say yes. I talk to my kids who are quite young and say, the secret to getting what you want, just make it easy to say yes. And they can get very creative in manipulating at that point, but it works as well too with customers. And then I think finally, as we talked about, structure your program policies to give your customers some internal leverage. Give them the tools that they need to advocate internally for the resources, time, and priorities of this initiative, in your initiative, to be successful. And if you structure your incentives in the right way, it does make it easier for your customers to put the best person on the job, or to say, we're going to make this other project wait 2 months while we finish this up first, because we actually get a benefit from here if we do it. So think about how you can do that and let your customers know this is why we structured it this way, is to enable you to be successful before you. Okay, so went through that pretty quickly. There's obviously a lot more depth that we can go into a lot of things, but just wanted to share some ideas. I hope that's useful to you. If you have any questions, we've got a little bit of time, and if you think about things later as well too, at the end, you'll see my contact information, and happy to have you reach out and engage with me there. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. Yeah, I think breaking it down in the framework that you shared with us today really helped make this seem, manageable to go after your clients with a plan of action. So I appreciate that. We do have questions that have come in, and I see them rolling in now. So please go ahead and continue to submit your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. So our first question, I think, is an interesting one. And it says, what if our user has lots of other priorities coming from within their company versus the priority of implementing our solution? Related, what if other priorities arise after the purchase was made and these take precedence versus their goals of our solution at the time of the purchase?
Yeah, that's one that comes up quite a bit. I think this is one of those, and it will depend on your solution and how big of an impact it has on your potential customer. I worked with one organization where the CEO and the others recognized that the importance of the impact of the software, as well as the price tag they were paying, made this a huge priority. But they actually went to their IT department and said, we are putting all other non-critical initiatives on hold until this project is done. And they took workload off the plate. I think you can go through and suggest to your customer a couple of things. Say, our most successful customers do that. Our most successful customers say, let's get this done in the next 2 months or 3 months and just focus on adoption. so that we can get through these other things, and here are the benefits for them. I think if you structured this the right way as well, you can show them the company personal incentive they have to get there. But the reality is there will be some customers that do have higher priorities or other competing interests, or maybe they've had some financial issues and they don't have the staff or turnover or whatever it may be. And in those cases, I think you can do a couple of things. One is to highlight for them and say, look, I understand your situation, but understand here's what's at risk if you're not able to do this, or we can adjust some expectations accordingly around value. But let's have a discussion right now about the expected value and ROI you will get and what that will mean for future renewals and success now. And when your situation changes, how can we get in touch to reconfigure things? So it can be done by outlining those, but I think that also comes back to do you have the right incentive plans put in there to make it easier for them to say, oh, we get a bigger bang for a buck here than we will for someone else. And I think the other thing to keep in mind with all of this here is the idea here is to try and incentivize them to take behaviors they really should be taking anyway. You're trying to encourage them to do what will make them successful so they benefit even more. This is just sort of highlighting it for them in a way and trying to create the motivations to get them there faster.
Awesome. I see a bunch of questions coming in asking about incentives. Could you give us some examples of customer incentives that you might recommend throughout different points in the customer journey? People are asking for both examples of personal and the company ones.
Sure, absolutely. So I think some of the company ones, those are easier to track through, and those can be, again, more the financial or service level ones. So that might be, here is a discount if you complete these certain tasks by a certain time at a certain level of completeness, kind of thing, accurately. So they're up and running and in a position where success is really up to them, and you can get them out of the train, stop blaming the vendor trap. So that could be a discount. I've seen other companies say we will give you free training. Or discounted training. I've seen we'll give you access to certain modules that you might not otherwise have. In general, what I like to think through is what are some of the things that your salespeople might try to give away to land a deal? How can you structure those in a way that they earn the right for those if they demonstrate the behaviors that will make them and you successful? In terms of personal incentives, I've seen a variety of different things that have been effective. That can include things where, especially at the end user level of, like I said, is there a certain training? Is there something that will help their career or help their future career prospects that you can offer them? I've also seen companies, one client we worked with, they were collecting success stories from their internal users about how a certain application helped them close more sales deals, and give some specific examples to that. And they would go through, and everyone who put in a clear business case for that was eligible for a very desirable prize. I can't remember what it was, but it was something expensive, a trip or something else like that. But it was a big enough situation that by having the end user show that using this application helped them close deals and put in a number amount of what they closed, tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars. That was a number and a proof point that resonated with the executives of the client company. And it helped to secure renewals and to further other adoption efforts. So they structure that like, okay, you're giving us social proof internally that we can use to justify the renewal and expansion of this account with our customer. Everybody was happy. And there may be other things, but also do keep in mind that sometimes, people really just are looking for an easier way to do their job and be happy in their job. And give them, have their leadership think through how they can reward their staff. Here's a day off. Here's a movie pass. Here's something else. It doesn't have to be huge, but it can just be enough to recognize the contribution you've made and that you've done what's asked. You've done it well and better than anyone else.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing those examples. Another related question about incentives. The question is, how mature does a CS program need to be to start considering using incentives?
Oh, I'd like to see it from day one. It doesn't need to be mature at all. And I think what it does need to do, though, is be justifiable and be clear. So start simple. And, like the easiest ones are those examples of stop giving away value and instead exchange it for behavior. So even if it is the complete these onboarding tasks within a certain day and attend every QBR in the first year, whatever it needs to be, what's going to add the most value for you? And if it is just get them to return a phone call, get them to attend a QBR, whatever it may be, you can put those simple pieces in there. And it could also be, ask them to come prior to a QBR and fill out a form online that tells you what are their most proudest achievements so far, where they're struggling the most, so that you have ammunition and you can plan for an appropriate meeting. It can be very, very simple, but just make it easy for them to say yes. But you should do it from day one. And what I would recommend is, as you start to map out your customer journey and your processes, you can just do swim lanes. Here's the journey, here are the key processes, here are the key behaviors that we want to have, and here's some incentives in there. And you can start very small. You can get people in a conference room together for 2 hours and map out, here's a simple thing, let's just go try it. Let's test it and try it, iterate and experiment.
Yeah. Another question that might be related, and maybe the same answer applies. When it comes to financial incentives, how do you avoid making things overly complex? It seems like that too many if this, then this type of incentives would be hard to administer and hard to communicate to customers. Is the answer, like you said, just keep it simple?
Oh, it is pretty much, but I absolutely agree that is a risk. And I always recommend that people start exceedingly small and come up with what are 1 or 2 simple financial incentives that we can give in exchange for either this 1 key behavior or these 2 key things. So you might do that here. If you complete onboarding, here's a refund, or here's a discount off of your next invoice up to X%. But it must be very smart goals, must be complete, must be time bound, it must be what it needs to be. And then you can experiment with adding in 1 or 2 others down the road. But iterate and experiment is my guess. But simple is key, and you don't have to incentivize every single behavior. Sometimes the simple act of identifying the behaviors and the incentive might be they want to be successful in their career. You just need to show that this behavior will make them so, and they can self-motivate. So you can try that too.
I like that. So talking about experimenting, we have a question that says, how do you identify good customers to be part of a pilot group?
That is always a challenge. What I tend to try, and I'm sure others have had other experiences, is I like to experiment with new customers who have no experience with us before, and people who I think will, during the sales process, I get a sense that they are motivated, that they are open to ideas, they're open to try new things, and that they are really looking to make this a success. And for new customers, they have no idea what's the right process and flow. And you can just even tell them during the sales process, we do things differently than a lot of your other vendors, and here's what our program looks like, and we're piloting this. We would love to invite you to participate, and here's how you benefit. Once you've got a few success stories under your way, then you can retrofit it to existing customers, either as part of a renewal or, we've changed our prices and here's the new structure, and explain it to them. But if you've already done it with some new customers and you can prove success stories, then you can justify, here's why we're doing it this way, and here's what we're seeing, here's how you will benefit from this new program.
Awesome. There's so many questions. Okay, so let's see. For those people who are resistant in taking the time to really think through and execute change and communication management, what are some ideas in helping them see the value so they act? I've tried to explain it many times, but they only want to focus on software setup, and not this important element.
I've encountered that many times as well too, and there's no easy way to get through there. A couple things that can work, and there will be some customers that no matter what you do, and despite your best efforts, you just won't get there. One, I like to ask customers, hey, you've made some great assumptions about the ROI that you're going to get, and you probably came up with our business case, and this is all great, but you probably assumed that you'd get 100% user adoption in that. What does your business case look like? What does the value look like to you if you only get 30% adoption or 20% adoption? Sometimes I will also ask them, when you look across your landscape of other live IT systems, what level of effective adoption do you have there? Do you think you're using 100% of the capabilities of the system, or 100% of your people using 100% of the time? What does that look like? And as you start to peel back the onion, they start to realize that they leave a lot of value on the table and they have a lot of problems, but they may not be motivated to do anything about it. You can also go through and say, here's what our most successful customers do. Go and talk with them and learn about the problems that they've had, that they've avoided, or how they've addressed them, to just confirm this as well too. And then sometimes you can even just ask the question, what evidence would you need to see to change your mind about this? What would it look like? How can we prove to you that you faced risk here and that you may be disappointed in the results? And sometimes that can get them going. So there are a few things like that you can do, but some people you just can't reach.
Okay. What are some examples of clear, measurable outcomes when it comes to user adoption?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked. So we actually, my business partner, Student Abbott Moore, has come up with an approach that she calls AMPM that I really love. We like to go through, and AM stands for activity metrics or adoption metrics. And those are sort of the leading indicators that show that you are on the path to getting the results that you want. So certain number of records are created or updated or things are entered, but basically looking through and saying, are people using the system as intended, as designed, and what are the numbers behind that? And then also looking at the performance metrics or the PM metrics, and those are the lagging indicators. What is the business value that we can attribute to this? And it's not always easy to get there, but looking over a period of time. I wrote an article about this as well too that's on our blog that I'm happy to share out if you're interested, about equivalent metrics. And that's even looking at things. So for example, we have solar panels on our house, and we have a little online portal that tells us the equivalent of, number of kilowatt hours generated, all this other transactional type stuff, but then they convert it into something meaningful. And they say, this is the corresponding number of trees not burned, or gallons of or barrels of oil not used, or cars off the road as a result of using this energy source as to others. And that's meaningful. That's like, okay, here's where this looks like. So you might be able to come up with a justifiable way to show folks that, hey, using this simple and justifiable formula, we translate this much time saving into this much added revenue, this much other impact, to really show here's the value of adoption and where you're getting there. And I think as long as you have something that makes sense and is rational to folks, that you can come up with a meaningful metric that they can relate to.
So on the flip side of incentives, if you have a customer that's ignoring your emails and calls, is there any concept of a penalty for the customer as opposed to even trying to get them to take an incentive?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think that comes back to that question I first asked at the beginning with the coffee. Did they lower their prices for good behavior? Did they raise their price for bad behavior, or both? And I am perfectly fine with customers too. Like I'm not an expert in pricing strategies. There are folks out there that is their entire business and they get way in the weeds of it. But I am a believer of incentivizing the behavior that you want and making it harder for not having behavior you don't want. So by all means, come up with a penalty. And maybe it's you structure in the way, again, it's a penalty, but maybe it's a reward for them. They get this discount or this benefit if they do a certain thing by a certain time. You don't have to tell them it is a penalty per se. Now, I have seen some contracts where customers expect a penalty on the vendor if they don't live up to service level agreements, if their system is down, if they don't fulfill uptime commitments and those sort of things. You can try that with your customers, and I'm not sure, some may go for it, depends on the nature of your software piece, to having those mutual service level agreements, then that's a great way to go too. But by all means, I also know of other folks out there, service providers, who say, this customer is difficult to deal with, they're not friendly, and they take up a lot of my extra time. I'm going to charge, I'll work with them going forward, but I'm going to charge them a hell of a lot more than I would my favorite customers and those who are easy to work with. Go for it.
There you go. What if there are roadblocks on the customer side that is stalling their progress? Anything you can do there as a CSM?
I think some of that comes back to how you framed up the expectations with the customer about how everyone's going to be successful from the very beginning. And one of the things that we encourage CSMs to do is when you're going through, especially during the initial conversations and you're sort of building rapport with customers, spend time talking about the process of how you will collaborate, and spend time being explicit with them and getting agreements around how both of you will handle it when things get delayed. And what we've often found helpful is we just say, look, inevitably through a project, hiccups will come up. There'll be delays on your end. There'll be some problems on our end. We're going to figure out what this looks like. But here's what you can expect from us when that happens. One is, I'm not going to just ignore it. I'm going to call you on it. And two, we're going to talk about the problem, how we resolve the problem, and if we need to change any of our expectations of how we work together going forward. And three, you might even have, and I encourage people to do this, having escalation points into their senior leadership throughout the day. Say, here's where we're on track, here's where we're behind, so that if the person or individual you're dealing with becomes a blocker or non-responsive or whatever, you have a clear escalation path, but it's done under the expectation that you will always tell them in advance. Part of our contract and our agreement with your executive is that we will advise them of this, and we will give regular status meetings. I will notify you in advance if I have to report something, so you're not blindsided. But it is my duty, my obligation to do this as part of my job. But ultimately, sometimes even at those senior levels, there will be blockers, and sometimes there's not a lot you can do, but you can definitely try to structure things differently from the beginning and put those escalation points and processes in place, so that when you need them, it's not a personal relationship issue.
Okay. We have a question that says, how do you generate an incentive for an existing customer where there is not an agreement to be signed at that time?
That's a good one. So I think you can still do some of the same things as well, but you may need to get a little creative there. And one of them may be, hey, we've tested this out with other customers. We found that this works for us and for our customers, that everyone is more successful. Here's what we're prepared to offer you, and you do X, Y, and Z, and here's how you will benefit, and sneak it in that way. At some point in the future, there may be changes to the agreement. You can bring those in by all means. Also, I used to do quite a bit of contract work. If it's a happy customer and you're happy with them, if they don't want to sign on board for whatever reason, well, that's interesting. I'd want to investigate why. But from a contracts perspective, everything's negotiable, and you can always come back and try and change things if you need to. But if it's not going well, I think that's where you can propose it to them and say, here's what we've done, and here's how I think this will make things better for you and for us. Let's change the environment so that we're both more successful.
Got it. We have a question that says, what if our product does have some functionality that varies customer to customer and behaviors may change based on that functionality? Any tips for scaling an incentive program there?
Okay, so I'm trying to understand what that might be, because I know there's a lot of systems out there that are highly configurable by customers, if that's what you're referring to, or if it's something else. What you might try then is, what are the typical behaviors that you would want to see at a macro level, and how can you make those behaviors or incentives apply to this customer? If you need to go on a customer by customer basis, like at a high touch piece, you can absolutely agree right up front specific milestones and incentives and measurable metrics with each customer that will trigger a benefit to them as well too. It gets kind of complicated to keep track of all that, so I would try to avoid that if you can, and start with keeping it simple. Find the areas where there are commonalities, but again, think through, what is it we're trying to incentivize here? Are there certain behaviors that customers are not doing that we're trying to incentivize them to change, and what makes us think this is the right approach? Are there other activities we would like them to take that will make them even more successful, and how do we do that in a way that's easily scalable and trackable and measurable, and not overly confusing? I'm not sure that was the best answer. So if that was your question and you'd like to reach out to me via LinkedIn, happy to jump on a call with you and try and think through something more specific for your organization.
Let's see. What are some specific metrics we can share with our executive teams to get them on board for organizational change?
I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, that might.
What we're looking for with that one. I think if there are areas where you can show a contrast between high performing customers, high renewing customers, expanding accounts, your most healthy, most successful accounts, and compare those to some of your worst accounts, and sort of show any differences of consistent behaviors, positive or negative here, or lack of delivery, and sort of say, we have an issue here, here's what it looks like. You might try that, but without a little more information, I can't really give a great answer. So again, feel free to contact me on LinkedIn.
Sure. We have a question that says, curious to see if you have recommendations for how to effectively identify when new users or leaders join a customer's organization so they can be brought up to speed.
Well, that's always a fun one. I like that. So I think one of the questions there may be a couple of ways. One, is there functionality within your tool that signal when people's accounts have been activated or deactivated, or if they've not been accessed for a certain amount of time, that might trigger some of this functionality. If you have the right CS platform and tool in there to enable it to trigger off some flows of a new new users sign up, that you prompt them to provide some information about their persona, their role in the organization, and what they're doing. And, depending on the results, trigger an alert to the CSM, like, oh, this may be a key person here, can do that. One of the other behaviors that I've often asked for the new customers is, hey, at some point, someone either on our side or yours is going to leave the organization or get promoted or transferred or change their role. When that happens, one of the things that we would really like to ask for is that you contact us to let us know what's changing and who the new contacts are, so we can address this appropriately. That's just asking for the behavior that you want. Even just doing that and reminding people periodically, maybe at each QBR, if there's any staffing changes, please let us know so we can do whatever. So I think there's those, how do you get notified? And then I think it's absolutely essential to remember that whenever, especially a leader type person is leaving and a new one's coming on, you've got to rebuild the relationship and you've got to rebuild the trust, and you need to set the history and context with the new person who's taking over so that they understand what was done before and why, what are the agreements that are in place, what are the successes you've had, what are the challenges, and also so you can learn from them what are their new versions of success and their priorities, and make sure you're continuing to be aligned with what you want to do. And sometimes you can have those initial conversations with them. It may take them 2 or 3 months to get up to speed in their job before they're ready to make some changes. So don't treat it as a one-off conversation, but be ready to stay on top of that and follow up with them to make sure you have the behaviors and commitments from them that you need.
I like that. Okay, let's see. We have a question that says, do you have any exercises or advice for small SaaS teams on how to align the customer success and product team on what ICBs to prioritize for product development?
Ooh, that is a good one. Well, one of the things I like to see too is what are the current alignment incentives between product and customer success teams, and make sure you guys are already aligned and working well to drive customer behavior. And for example, one of the ones we're seeing very commonly is, does everyone have a stake in NRR? Is that part of everyone's incentive plans, and where does it need to be? If there are misalignments already within your teams, throwing ICB on top of this will probably not solve a whole lot of your problems. You might need to get the other alignment issues first. But then I think working through with your product teams to say, okay, what are the behaviors that we need to see from our customers, and how do we enable those and request those? Similarly, you may very well find that one of the behaviors you want is for your customers to do a better job of providing feedback or insights to the product team so that they can do their job effectively and know what's most relevant for them. If you need to incentivize those behaviors, by all means, figure out how to do that and when's the appropriate time. So this is probably an opportunity that you could take with your product team, look over the entire customer journey map and say, where is it that the product team would like to see a different customer behavior that would help them do their job and ultimately help you? And how can you guys work collaboratively to request that behavior from customers and incentivize it and track when it's there?
Awesome. Well, we are almost at the top of the hour, so thank you so much, Jason, for walking us through all of this, and also answering all these questions that we had. I think it was really great. So just want to remind everyone again that we will be sending out an email with a link to the recording that you can watch on demand or share with your colleagues that weren't able to join. And at the end of this, survey will pop up, so we would appreciate if you just take a moment just to give us your feedback on today's event. And thanks again for joining us, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Bye.